You wouldn't worry so much about what people think about you if you actually knew how little anybody ever thinks about you.
This is Synchronicity.
This is Synchronicity.
This is Synchronicity.
This is Synchronicity.
This is Synchronicity. This is Synchronicity.
Where did you get your ideas from?
Ideas? Oh, man, I got a million dreams. That's all I do is dream. All the time.
I thought you played piano.
No, this is not piano. This is dreaming.
Welcome to episode 45 of Synchronicity. My guest this week is Lorenzo Hagerty from the Psychedelic Salon. We'll get to Lorenzo in just a second. As you can tell by the intro, or maybe you couldn't tell, I'm still at the beach. As long as I'm at the beach, I'm going to continue to use beach intro. What you heard after that is actually something put together by a musician named Slacker, who unfortunately killed himself not to get too dark right at the beginning of an episode, but must have been about 10 years ago. He was big in the electronic music, progressive underground house scene in the late 90s, early 2000s. His name is Slacker. Really, really awesome stuff. And that was a little something he put together, which is kind of like a musical vignette of something that Duke Ellington said. He's the one who's talking and saying, I don't know what you're talking about, ideas. These are dreams. Duke Ellington's super cool. I love that little thing. I used it to open up a mix that I made back in 2013. One of the rare recordings of mixes that I've done. So if you like that, you can check that out on my SoundCloud, soundcloud.com/Pureland. Don't ask me why I came up with that name. I have no idea. Welcome, though, again, to Synchronicity. Super excited you are here. I have an excellent episode for you today with Lorenzo. Before we get into that, though, I wanted to talk about a couple of other podcasts. So what I've been doing, I've really been delving into podcasts this week. I've mentioned on this show before that I'm not a huge listener of podcasts. That's weird. I own and run a podcast network, MindPod Network. I have my own podcast, but I don't think I would consider myself a heavy podcast listener until this vacation. I've been taking long walks on the beach, which I do enjoy, I found out, and truthfully, just been listening to podcasts, about hour and a half long walks. I can listen to one or two depending on what they are, and I've been loving it. Something clicked and I get it. So hopefully that carries through to this podcast, but even if not, even if it doesn't, I think what I've learned, and I tweeted about this, I am on Twitter. You can find me, Noah Lampert, my name. It's easy, right? I tweeted about this, and I think it really clicked for me, is that one of the reasons that podcasts, I think, are so popular right now, or a lot of people kind of get the medium itself, is it's a really effective way at tuning people's consciousness, your own consciousness, by listening to other people. And there's something really to be said for that dynamic, interaction between one person, two people, whatever it is, ideas in a person. It's just really, there's something poignant about it. And I've been listening to a variety of them two podcasts that stuck out to me this week, that just when I've been re-listening to them. One was what my buddy Zach Leary had this guy Tony Moss on his show, It's All Happening, and Tony is just truthfully one of the coolest guys I've ever heard. Just so genuinely amazing in his perspectives in the world. So go and check that one out. It's on mindpodnetwork.com. It's also on Zach's new website, zachleary.com. Really helped him out a little bit on that. He did such a great job. So either of those places, check it out. I really think you're going to like it. If you like this show, if you're tuning in, I can almost guarantee you're going to like it. It's totally awesome. Another episode just came out recently. It's on Duncan Trussell's podcast. He had this guy, Dr. Bruce Damer, on, and oh my God, this guy, what a cool guy. Scientist, part of think tanks. What an episode. Really, really interesting. I think some incredibly valuable stuff. Really peak guest for Duncan. Really awesome. I know Duncan is in Burning Man right now. I spoke a little bit about Burning Man last week. I feel like literally everyone I have ever known, will ever know, is at Burning Man. Everyone, it's like my whole social circle just gets whittled down to like two people who are not at Burning Man at this time of year. So I hope everyone's having fun there. I look forward to hearing the music and the stories and the experiences that people will share when they come back from that. Okay, last thing, generosity experiment. It's over today. By the time you hear this, it will be September and it will be over. We ended up raising collectively about $720. I just logged in to the GoFundMe page and realized I fucked up. And what I did is I didn't set up my withdrawal settings. I didn't put in my bank account information because I wasn't thinking about it, because ultimately the money's not going to me. And so they disabled donations. It looks like for about a few weeks. So that's totally on me. Like I said before with this experiment, which is where we're collectively raising money to send some people who need it. Truthfully, I've learned a lot of things from this. I'm definitely doing it again, probably at the beginning of the new year, but I'm going to change the platform. I don't think I'm going to use GoFundMe. I think I'm going to use something else. I'd like it to be a little more transparent, a little more interactive, but I'm really proud that collectively as a community, we've raised over $700. Now, on to some not so great news with that. The fees afterwards associated with everything, it looks like the actual amount of money that we're sending is a little over $600. But still, that's pretty cool. So where is it going to go? Technically, it is not over. Voting is still open. By the time you're hearing this, it'll be closed. So I'm going to know tonight where we're going to be sending it. It's either to a humane society that was impacted in Louisiana with the flooding, or it's going to be to a child who's going through some very difficult times and needs some medical help. So we'll know. And I also realized I don't like the way I set that up at the end. I'm basically making you pick and choose between animals and a small child. I don't know if that's really what I want to be doing, is making people make those decisions. I'm reading a really excellent book. I gave it away as a book giveaway called Rambam's Ladder. I spoke about this before. It's about Maimonides' ladder of giving, and it's 8 rungs, and there's all these different types of giving, and they have precedents. It's really good, and I've been looking at the generosity experiment through that lens, and I'm going to try to cater it to be a little more reflective of what I think the spirit of it is going to be. So again, thank you to everyone who participated. That's super cool. Over $600 is nothing to sneeze at. I can tell you that without a fact. Anyone knows that. That's not a small amount of money. It can absolutely have a major change on people's lives. So really thank you for everyone who participated. Okay. Lorenzo. I don't know how many of you know about the Psychedelic Salon. It's a podcast. It's a community. It's basically, Lorenzo has been putting up these talks by a ton of different people, but one of my favorites, Terence McKenna, for over a decade, 11 years now. He started in 2005. And I remember listening probably not too long thereafter, 2005, 2006, and just being like, wow, this is if you haven't heard Terence McKenna, this is where you go to find it. Go to psychedelicsalon.com, check out any talk, pick one at random, and you will be blown away. I mentioned in this episode, and one of my favorite things about Terence, I don't believe everything Terence McKenna has ever said. And I think anyone you know who knew him, even himself, if he was still around, he would tell you, don't take everything I say as gospel, right? He just had such an amazing way of opening up his mind and other people's minds through novelty, through imagination, through just talking. But that one of the greatest orators of our generation, my generation, earlier generation, whosever generation he's from, just incredible. My big three in terms of talkers, if you're going to listen, orators, it would be him, Terence McKenna, Alan Watts, and Ram Dass. I think those three, you could put on any one of their tapes and you can be captivated. So Lorenzo has run the Psychedelic Salon by himself, pretty much with help from other people, for over 10 years. He's actually at a point where he's transitioning away in March of next year to not having a personal involvement with it. He basically puts these together himself every week. So I think that's a cool thing that he's doing. He's going to learn to delegate and kind of let the community run with it. But we speak about a ton of different stuff here. Towards the latter part of the episode, we stumble on to that we are both big fans of marijuana and kind of geek out over that for a little bit. But we talk about so many different things: technology, consciousness, synchronicities, just the importance of an open mind. His story, I mean, he's someone who was in the military. He was a lawyer. He was involved in the early computer scene. Just a very fascinating and interesting life, and just a really cool guy. And I know we're going to talk again, and I'm thrilled that he came on. It was nice to be able to do a podcast with him while I'm at the beach and I'm super relaxed. So yeah, that's this week's episode. I think you're going to enjoy it. Thank you to everyone who has donated to the podcast. That's super duper cool. Thank you to everyone who is rating and reviewing on iTunes. That is also super duper cool. Anything else I got to talk about? Listen, if you want to chat, want to send me anything, more and more of you are doing it. We're talking about some really cool stuff. Send me an email, noah@syncpodcast.com. One note, I do these book giveaways every week, right? I'm not going to do one this week. I'm still at the beach. And I'm probably not going to do them on a weekly basis anymore. Let me tell you why. When I started it, it was just like, you know what? I'm just going to give these books away. It's going to be a cool thing. I would love if it happens. And so I've been reviewing my expenses for the podcast, and it looks like I've spent almost $1,000 sending books out, and I love to do it, but I'm going to look for more, maybe not so expensive ways of doing this. So I have partners with a few people who I can give out books for, but I'm going to for now, I'm going to make it a monthly thing. So again, if you want to be entered in these giveaways, you can go to syncpodcast.com, join the community. I send an email out every week about the episode and some other stuff, and you have a chance to win a free book in perpetuity. I'm not changing that aspect of it. So if you are already joined the community and you're like, what? Now he's not giving away on a weekly basis. What a fucking scam. Well, ha ha ha, you fell into my trap. But seriously, you really, really, I'm going to give them away once a month, maybe, so I don't spend so much money sending people other books. Okay, that's it, officially. Without further ado, enjoy this episode with Lorenzo Hagerty.
Hey, gotcha.
Hey, nice to meet you.
Good to see you. I've heard your voice on the podcast, but it's good to see your face too.
Oh, cool. Yeah, good to. I likewise the exact same, the exact same thing. I mean, I think I've probably been listening to your podcast for a little longer than my podcast has been around, because I think I didn't connect the dots, but I think I heard Psychedelic Salon must have been around like 2005, 6, sometime in that time period. So I was early, mid-20s, and it was Terence McKenna, something like, and I just was like, oh man, this is a whole thing. And this was right around the time where you could torrent stuff pretty heavily back then. Right. And I would just go and there was, not because I wanted to steal from anything, but just because there was so much stuff out there and I wanted to listen to it. And I have the big three of speakers that I pretty much can listen to whenever, which is Terence McKenna, Alan Watts, and Ram Dass. I can listen to them talk basically about anything forever. So it's a real treat to have you on. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, you were there early on. In fact, I used to promote some of the torrents. I had links to them and stuff like that.
That's awesome. Yeah. So yeah, we'll just get started. I'm gonna turn my video off.
Yeah, we'll do that, and then it'll be a cleaner audio.
Yeah, I think so. All right.
Yeah.
I'll see you at the end.
Okay.
So yeah, thank you for coming on. So just to give you a little background where I'm at specifically in the here and now. So I'm at the beach. I've been taking these really long walks, 2 mile, 3 mile walks in the beginning of the day.
You're at the beach where?
I'm in North Carolina, southern North Carolina. So Carolina Beach.
You guys have a storm going to brush against you this weekend.
I saw that. I think we'll probably be leaving in, I don't know, a few days, but I saw that there was a storm. Is it Gaston? Is that still the...
Yeah, I think that is supposed to kind of graze North Carolina and then head out to sea.
Yeah, so we'll probably leave before that just because this place has been, I was telling my wife, there's a pier right outside of our house. And that I was like, I remember like 15, 20 years ago when there was like a shop at the end of the pier and there was like video games, little arcade games. And I was like, that's been gone for like 10 plus years. This pier has been knocked down like 10 times in the past 15 years. So it's definitely, weather is definitely changing. That's pretty clear. So I've been listening to podcasts every day as I take these long walks, and I've been, re-getting into Psychedelic Salon and a lot of the talks you put up. And I remember your voice; it was bringing back nostalgia. And today I was listening to your most recent one, and I wanted to talk about that a little bit later in this episode. But I just wanted to say, thank you for doing this for these past 11 years. And I know you're coming to kind of a transition point where you're relinquishing some personal involvement with the project. And I just wanted to express my sincere gratitude and thanks for putting it out there because I think it's such a service that you're doing, and you're doing it in such an authentic way that really just thank you.
Well, I'm doing it because I enjoy doing it, and I don't even think of it as a service. That, in fact, I was in the military, and sometimes people say, "Oh, thank you for your service," and I feel like saying, "Well, I wasn't a volunteer, even though I did volunteer. The draft was after me, so I don't feel like it was a voluntary service, and it was more forced servitude. And you don't need to thank me for that." But this is different. This was just fun.
Yeah, and it's just you've done it in a way that I think you use. Terence McKenna is one of my favorites, not because I take everything he says as gospel. That's one of the reasons I love Terence so much is he specifically just had such an imaginative mind and could go in so many directions. It kind of snapped you out of your regular paradigm of thinking, kind of like he was almost like a psychedelic drug himself. And I realize this whenever I hear him speak, just his cadence and the words, something that immediately this talk that you just put up is about culture a lot of the way. So I started thinking just the way he pronounces the word culture made me think about both definitions of the word, right? One, which is the arts and other manifestations of human intellectual achievement regarded collectively, and then the other, which is the cultivation of bacteria, tissue cells, etc., in an artificial medium containing nutrients, which either of those could apply to our collective consciousness or world at any point. So he's just fantastic. So, but before we get into all that stuff, I wanted to talk about you specifically and kind of how did you go from being in the Army, a naval officer, being an attorney, an electrical engineer, motivational speaker, corporate geek, all of these things I've read extensively. I've known a little bit about you for some time. What was the transition from, what were you doing early on in life that led you to where you are now? I know that's a grand question, but nevertheless.
Well, that old U2 song that says, "I still haven't found what I'm looking for." I never really had a plan. I get bored once I figure out how to do something. I used to joke about the fact that when I was in Houston practicing law, I practiced law, but once I learned how to do it, I quit practicing. I didn't need to practice anymore. Right. And basically, I don't know. It's just I'm a curious person, and one thing kind of leads to another. Technology has kind of directed me. As a little kid, we lived nearby a National Guard armory, and they'd throw out these old radios, and I'd take them home in my wagon and take them apart. And so I was always kind of geeky. And I was practicing law when personal computers started getting exciting. And to tell you the truth, I had this surefire scheme how to win at craps in Las Vegas, but I needed a computer to work it out for me, and there weren't any powerful enough. So I started a computer company mainly with the idea of building a computer
awesome.
I could use. And then, of course, I got distracted and I wound up in the computer business. And then when I was I kind of went broke and stuff like that, and had to work my way back up. And I became internet evangelist for a big phone company, Verizon.
Yes.
And in between that, the technology I found was ecstasy, MDMA. So, one technology has led me to another, and that plus, the sailing. I loved sailing, and I was a sailing instructor in college and summer job, and that led to stuntman in the movies, and so it's just I've been following my interests, but as a headhunter told me in the 90s, they couldn't help me because I had no career path.
I'm not too far. I can relate in a lot of ways, and I think. I'm 33 now. I grew up, I can remember a time without the internet, but at this point, the majority of my life now, there's been the internet, which is a weird phenomenon and also just allows for so many different things that weren't even really, even by someone like Terence McKenna couldn't have conceived of where we've come from just since, the late 90s. It's pretty nuts. So I love this idea of technology being an influence in your career, in your life, in your interests. I right now am reconciling the idea of what we call artificial intelligence and, the singularity and all these things we hear people talk about, some of which have just become buzzwords. But what's very interesting to me is this theory of technology just being another manifestation of the divine, however you characterize that, whether that's a god, whether that's a collective unconscious, whether it's a collective creative dream, whatever it is. Technology to me seems to be just another extension and manifestation of what's going on. So it makes perfect sense to me that this has kind of been an underlying current in your life, because that's where it connects in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think that it's a basic human desire of some kind, or at least it was for me, to connect with other people. And even when I was like 10, 12 years old, excuse me, a neighbor friend of mine lived 2 doors down from me. He and I rigged up lines, cable through the trees to have a little telegraph set so that at night we could send Morse code back and forth to one another. And, it was not a very successful experiment, but I think it's a basic human desire to want to connect. And now that we have iPhones and Skype and FaceTime and Periscope, we've gone crazy with this. Not crazy in a bad way, but in a good way.
Yes.
And I think that if we're not careful, we give technology all the credit, but it's just a lever. And I was involved in the internet at the corporate level when we were trying to roll out and convince people to use it even back in the 90s, and one of our big dreams was that someday people would log on to the internet without even knowing. It'd just be like electricity and the telephone. And that's the way it is today. We didn't think we'd live to see it, but it's gone pretty fast.
It is. It's such a huge kind of like exponentially increasing wave of what's going on with technology. It's very fascinating. I think to me, it feels like kind of the culmination, or we're in the process of a transition where everything is kind of merging together. So this is somewhat of a singularity theory. I don't know that I'm fully on board with the exact term singularity or what's happening, but it does feel kind of like the omega point is drawing all these things in closer together, of which technology is a manifestation of that. I mean, this is technology as we have it, like you just said, is pretty psychedelic in and of itself. I remember when I first started taking psychedelics, which was when I was about 15 years old. I was 15 years old. I took some LSD at a music college 5-week program, which was my eventual college, 18-hour trip, three blotter tabs of sunshine acid from California. Very, very intense trip. It really kind of revolutionized every aspect of what I had experienced before. And we actually had the early versions of cell phones back then, just the very basic Nokia. Maybe there was Snake on the phone, but it was, it was like a crazy thing to have in your hand. I recently, like a year and a half ago, took some mushrooms, and had an iPhone in my hand. And the last time I had taken psychedelics was probably 10 years before that. And I was just blown away what this tool actually connected us to in terms of other consciousness, in terms of other people. It was just like a revolutionary kind of like mind-blowing experience where it's like, well, now, like you said, people don't even realize they're connected all the time. It's just something that we are doing via these things that are attached to us. It's very fascinating. So I also, not to shift gears too dramatically, but you're going to Burning Man? Are you going coming up?
No, actually, it just started today. I'm not going. No.
So
I've decided to live it vicariously by watching it online, but it's really expensive for one thing,
I know.
and very uncomfortable for old people.
and not old people, I'll say too. I've never been to Burning Man, but I swear it feels sometimes like I know 90% of the people who are going there. I mean, my friend group and my social group, it just seems like everyone flocks there every single year. And I've never made it myself, but it's a fascinating thing. Could you talk a little bit about, because you've been going for a while now, or you had been, but you're not going this year, but what exactly was the experience like when your early times? Because I know that's how you got your name changed. You used to be known as Larry. Yeah. So
in 2002, I'd lived out here. A lot of friends went to Burning Man, and I knew a lot about it. I'd seen videos. Excuse me, I'm going to cough a second.
That's
here.
Okay.
I've got this frog in my throat I can't get rid of. But anyhow, I got shamed into going in 2002. It was my 60th birthday, and this woman friend of ours who I'd met actually the first time I went to a Terence McKenna meeting in New York. And anyhow, she was going for her 60th birthday and more or less shamed me into going. And I don't know, you get off. I don't like camping. I don't enjoy the desert. I don't do well in the heat. And after a half hour there, I knew I was going to come back. I wanted to stay. It's a vibe of some kind that has nothing to do with the physical senses as much as all of a sudden you feel like, oh wow, this is where I belong. It's some kind of a communal vibe. Now there were only about 25,000 people there that year, and which we thought was huge. They're up to 70,000 now.
Yeah.
But you can get the same vibe in more comfort at places like, well, there was just the Sci-Fi Festival in Holland this last week, which has one of the most beautiful sites on a lake that's all spread out in islands, and it's really a great site for something like this, a festival. Symbiosis is coming up. There's a lot of really great festivals that probably can give you even more. You can get more out of it than Burning Man because you don't have. It's not a survival mode in the Burning Man. You got to take everything in and everything out. You can't even pour your gray water on the ground.
Right.
So it's a different vibe, but you don't have to go to Burning Man to get it. And now there's all these things they call the afterburns. There's like maybe 50 of them around the world. And what it's really about is more than the event and the place. It's the people, and it's the consciousness that you meet. And I think that the important part of Burning Man happens afterwards when the people come back and their energy is shared with those of us that didn't get to go. It's an awareness that the world doesn't have to be like it is, that it can definitely be a better place, even in a really rugged situation like the playa at Burning Man.
Right. I love that, what you're saying too, because a parallel I'll draw is a lot of people I know kind of have, depending on their particular path, whether it's Buddhist, whether it's a Hindu path, a lot of them want to go to India, Dharamsala to see Tibetan stuff at this point, but a lot of them want to go there and they feel they have to go to get what is there. And of course, there's no harm in going to a place like that. I think you can pull in vibes or energy from really, holy places, but you don't have to. You really can tap into that same level of consciousness. And what you're saying is, we think the world can be a better place and we can work towards some better collective evolutionary stance than where we are now. That's the real point of it. Because that's what I said. Like, I know so many people who go, and in some ways I want to go, but in some ways I'm totally a pansy. Like, I don't want to go live in harsh conditions in a desert. And I know you transcend all that. And that's the juxtaposition, I think, is a part of why it works so well. But in the same sense, like, we can all still tap into that vibe at any point. It's interesting. Burning Man really came to the forefront of my consciousness because there's these parties there that they do Robot Heart. It's electronic music, and they're huge. There's these huge buses, and there's these festivals, and it's now become just like a popular cultural thing to do. And I want to go into kind of the talk that you just released and talk about culture a little bit, but that's kind of how it got in front of my face. And like some of the DJs who play there and some of the music that comes out every year is just like right in my wheelhouse, and I love it. But I also see how it's kind of shifted in its meaning for a lot of people because it's now an event to do. It's something that happens. So with that, I want to talk about this most recent episode of Psychedelic Salon that came out, which is Terence McKenna, a talk from 1997, and it has a lot to do with culture, and it has and you took out some very interesting parts of it too, and spoke about the role of culture. And now with lifespans, being what they are, people have more time to reflect on the role of culture and see if they got screwed or not, and how they feel about that. So if you're up for it, I'd love to talk a little bit about that episode and kind of what it means for you, and what do you think about the state of culture where we are these days?
Well, there's not a single culture, first of all.
Right.
Even at Burning Man, that's not a single culture. There's dozens and dozens of different cultures there. And I do agree with what Terence says about if you're not careful, culture can become a cult. And in a sense, our culture is what we've begin with in life. And, I was raised Irish Catholic, and so the Irish thing was big and the Catholic thing was big. And it took me a long time. Actually, it took me until I found psychedelics that my mind was open enough that I could really start to question many of the things that I was led to believe as a child, and of course, going to Vietnam taught me a lot about how the government worked. And so, I'd been questioning things, and that's the real value I see in psychedelics. Not necessarily, you don't have to do ayahuasca every month or anything like that.
Right.
But a single trip like what you had can be enough to open somebody's mind to the fact that everything I'm being told should be questioned.
Yes.
And Leary's thing, think for yourself and question authority. And we get into these loops. Like if I had been born in Saudi Arabia, I'd probably be a Muslim right now.
Right.
And so I see little infants coming into the world, essentially like human stem cells, and they can become anything. If I had my way, nobody would be allowed to teach anything about religion to anyone under the age of 21. And
not a bad idea.
And then when you're old enough, you can start looking at it and seeing it. But if you're brainwashed with this as a child, it takes a lot to overcome. And that's the culture of your family, your religion, your nation that you're in. My father was a World War II vet, so I had all the flag waving stuff growing up. And culture is really something more to be overcome when you talk about common culture, not high art culture or anything like that. But we all live in these little bubbles that we were born into. Right. And I think our growth pattern is one that we have to start pricking these bubbles and popping them, and then seeing what the next bubble is that we're in. And eventually you kind of figure out what you're all about. And I think Terence hit the nail on the head, is that if you're only living for 40 years, you don't have time to do these things. And now I'm old enough that I'm looking back, and quite frankly, I wouldn't have liked to known myself when I was in my 30s and 40s. I was a conceited jerk,
That's how I feel myself when I was under 20.
I didn't understand. Pardon me? Go ahead.
That's how I feel about myself when I was under 20, and I'll probably feel like that about myself when I'm like 40 and 50. So
I feel that about myself like that when in my 60s. It's only about 2 weeks ago I started figuring things out. So, it's a continual process if you let it be. Now, I have friends back in this little Midwestern town where I went to high school that they've never left the town, and their lives are exactly like their parents and their grandparents, and they go to their grandkids' little league games like they went to their kids' little league games, and they don't even want to talk to me. I've just totally freaked them all out.
Yeah.
But and that's okay. They seem to be happy, but it wasn't something that made me happy. I had to keep stretching, and I love it here in California because talk about cultures. I'm in Southern California, and this is really a conservative area. And San Diego County has the biggest military footprint of any comparable area on the planet.
I didn't know.
And everybody is ex-military or working for the defense industry, except for the surfers and the the tourist industry. And so it's a very conservative area. And yet, I'm a 74-year-old guy with a ponytail, and nobody ever looks twice at me, and I'm accepted. My wife and I are both ex-military ourselves, and so you're accepted out here much better than you are in other parts of the world, and that's why I feel so comfortable here. I've been my Irish genes have been heading west for generations.
They keep going. Yeah, your epigenetics.
I'm at the edge of the west now. All I can do is go up.
So that's really funny. Your epigenetics are continuously pushing you to the west. There's nowhere else to go at this point, unless you want to go all the way to Asia. So go around. That's hilarious. Well, so talk to me a little bit about when was the first time you did psychedelics, and what psychedelic was it?
Well, it's technically not a psychedelic. It was MDMA, ecstasy. And it was in 1984 in Dallas, Texas. And of all places in the world to have ecstasy really hit the street big time, the last place you'd pick would be Dallas, and yet that's where it happened. And I just happened to be at the epicenter of it and knew people involved. And, I was I was 42 years old, going through my midlife crisis, and my computer company was having financial problems. And, a lot of pressure was building up on me. And then I took MDMA, which, is not really a psychedelic per se.
Yeah.
And that essentially took me back in my mindset to when I was a little boy and I was dreaming about, changing the world and things like that. And it really released a lot of these mental toxins I'd been carrying around. But it was another full year later before I even tried cannabis, and another year or so after that before I finally got up the courage to try LSD. And so, I was in my mid-40s when I really started experimenting. And then after finding Terence McKenna and the Palenque crowd and coming out here, I got involved in a research group. We were working our way through Sasha Shulgin's index, and we did a lot of things. So I finally have made up for my misspent youth, misspent by not doing anything. And, I've done a lot of stuff that I wouldn't recommend people to do, but, I didn't have any mentors. When I first got started, you couldn't find anything about drugs. The only literature in the library or bookstores that you could find was in the occult book section, and it was Carlos Castaneda's novels about Don Juan.
Yes.
And so, you just couldn't find information. And, I'd find a little mimeograph copy. They did mimeographs back then of Sasha Shulgin's speeches, and Rick Doblin was making the news some. And so there just was no information. And so I didn't have any peers. I was an old guy and didn't have anybody to teach me about these things. And so I made a lot of mistakes. And now, of course, we have Arrowwood, we have hundreds of podcasts about this. And so things have changed dramatically in the time that I've been involved in it. But I don't have any regrets about what I did. I every once in a while I sit here. We've been, we I had a lot of money at one time, and now we're down to an 8-year-old Honda Fit, and we've been living month to month in this apartment for 10 years. So, it's every once in a while I'll say, if I just hadn't dropped out, we could have a mansion right now. And then I got thinking, the maintenance on those damn things.
Exactly.
But I'm totally free. I quit my corporate job in the summer of '99, and I haven't been to a regular job since then. So I've had to scrape and scratch around and do a lot of different things, but I haven't had that calling where I've had to show up at a certain time every day and stay for the best hours of my day every day. And so things have really improved for me by getting off of this acquisitive treadmill of getting more stuff all the time. And I've gotten more interested in things of the mind than of physical things. And by giving up my quest to get more and more and bigger and better and faster and cars and stuff, it's really relieved a lot of pressure and made me much more relaxed. And sure, there's a few things I'd like from time to time, but overall, I wouldn't trade my spot now for any alternative I could have come up with.
See, that's the thing. You're fortunate, and I'm sure you realize that too, because a lot of people who gravitate towards, let's say, psychedelics, a spiritual practice, anything, esoteric and not completely based on, materialism, physical materialism in the world, it can be a rough transition. The later in life that comes, that can be the rougher of the transition. So you've been living what you want to be doing, wants aside at various times for 20 years almost. That's pretty great. That's really awesome, and it's also refreshing to hear that you wouldn't change it. And I think that's an important message, because I think all of us in our lives come to these points where there's these transitional times, and we have to question on what do we want to do. And to you, it sounds like through the aid of psychedelics as well, that you were able to determine, I don't want to be going to an office for 8 hours a day to make money, to get a better house, to get a better car, to get a better this. It's like, I actually want to start exploring what's going on inside of me. And to me, this brings us to a very interesting space, which is part of the reason this podcast is called Synchronicities. I'm a huge Carl Jung fan. Love the way he was able to serve as a bridge between East and West, and of course his, expositions on the collective unconscious, which I think gets very crystallized in a lot of ways when you do psychedelics, is this connection between the inner worlds and the outer external world, as we call it. Regardless of whether we believe there's actually a distinction, when you get down to non-dual theories, we can know that we have a world inside of our minds and a world that's out there perceived through our senses. And this connection between psyche and matter is one of my most, that's what fascinates me. And I think there is a substantial connection, because I don't believe there's a big difference. It's more of kind of like an optical illusion or perceptual illusion. So, during your course of studying psychedelics, have you come to any kind of theories or ideas about what life is, what the role of us being here? What are your kind of theosophical views on life?
Well, that used to change by the week, and now it's kind of changing. It's changing by the hour now.
I hear you on that.
That when I was younger, I used to give a lot more thought to the metaphysical world and what happens after you die. And I did a lot of these deep psychedelics that were like near-death experiences. And now that I'm getting much closer to my end day, that those things don't seem more as interesting to me, quite frankly. I'm more interested in what's going on day to day. I do think that no matter what your spiritual bent, that one of the things to kind of keep in mind might be the fact that maybe one of the things we should do here are things that we can do in a physical body that are not capable of being done in as a pure spirit. Which means to me, you should enjoy life, get some pleasure, eat ice cream, drink wine. So that's part of it. The other thing, I love the title of your show, Synchronicity, because there's been some very synchronistic events that to me synchronistic that I don't really plan these podcasts very far ahead.
I know how it goes, man. I know how it goes.
Yeah, I start playing a McKenna talk, and all of a sudden it just synchronizes with something going on in my life or in the world. And I used to say that coincidences are clues, and when the coincidences stop, then you're on the wrong path. And a synchronicity is a really powerful, is a coincidence on steroids. So there's something now, whether it's extra outside of me, or if it's just my own spirit that's attracting these things, there does seem to be some interaction between my spirit and or my consciousness. I like to think of it as consciousness rather than spirit, because everybody can kind of relate better to consciousness. And the way that some of these talks fall out. Now, it also can be a fact that Terence was just one of those people who had his finger on the pulse of the world and had a far eye, could see way ahead. And a lot of the talks that we're playing now, from 87 and 97, he could have recorded them last night.
Yeah, so true.
In a way, that shows that things haven't really changed all that much. But then you started out earlier, we were talking about technology. And, the iPhone, the web phone is 10 years old, not quite 10 years old. And yet almost half the people in the world have one.
Right.
Now, in the early days of the internet, that was one of the big complaints everybody had, is this is going to be just for the rich, for the West. And now the cell phones are bigger in other parts of the world than they are here even.
That's right.
Or web-enabled phones. That something is happening. There's some sort of a bifurcation going on, but it's not between the advantage and disadvantage as much. Now, it certainly is. That's still there.
Right.
But the less fortunate among us, many of them are now able to get cell phones. We have, I think, close to half of the human race is connected to the net in one way or another, right? That's a change that it's going to take hundreds of years for people to realize what really is happening here. But something big is underway, and I don't know what it is, but I know I'm fortunate to be able to hang around an 8.5-year-old and a 11.5-year-old girl, our two granddaughters, our youngest ones, and so I get to see them and their friends interacting. And you see kids, they're just playing games. Well, one of the games they play is Minecraft, and the oldest of the two, she's going to be a great architect if that's the way she wants to go. I mean, she's created some amazing structures, and they create music videos with some of these apps that I'm just blown away with the creativity that's coming out. And they're using these tools for what they are. They're just tools for their creativity. And so a lot of things are going to happen that we are just not prepared for, but I think in a good way. And we have to just go with the flow and not try to resist these changes, because the world, the only thing I really have a fear of is the status quo. It sucks.
That's, it's really interesting to me to hear you're clearly very optimistic about the future of our temporal time here, and I am too. And that can seem like a very odd position to stake out, given that there's a lot of things going on in the world that, listen, let's be honest here. We have a political election that, regardless of your political persuasion, isn't particularly inspiring. It's not something that you're saying like, well, this is great. I don't care if you're a Bernie Sanders supporter, hardline Trump supporter, like either way you're looking at this, this is not looking like a wonderful opportunity to change kind of the status quo, as you put it. And I also think, because of where the quote unquote status quo has gotten us in the past 50 to 100 years, I haven't done a great job. But I love how you talk about how these technologies allow, this is what I've seen, particularly in the past 10, 15 years. I'm a musician, and I kind of grew up with, teenage years with computers as music making tools. And it blew me away, just realizing that 10 years earlier, if I wanted to pursue making music, with technology, I would have need to be very rich or known someone who is very rich, because you were not going to get your hands on music making equipment or recording equipment in any by accident type of way, or especially with the ease that we can do it now by getting digital audio workstations. So I saw how technology enabled creativity, which also felt like it enhanced what you're talking about, consciousness, spirit, however you want to describe it, which does, I love that you put it, that when you are on the right path, when you're in the flow of things, when you're really feeling connected, synchronicities do seem to multiply. They come in very much like a psychedelic state, right? When you're on psychedelics, sometimes it just feels like that was Carl Jung's position. Everything is one giant synchronicity if you look at it the right way. If you have eyes to perceive it, you will see that everything is actually one giant synchronicity, which I believe as well. I love that you're describing technology as a means for expressing creativity. I view almost everything that comes out of the world, whether created by humans or just in nature, as inherently neutral, right? We can look at nature. I'm looking at the ocean right now. It's beautiful, it's peaceful, it's majestic. Nature also has horrible elements to it: death, dying, decay. A beautiful little baby lion cub gets eaten by a rival lion. Like, it all exists, and it's a neutral state. And I do believe that the consciousness and what we bring to the situation ultimately is what shapes our kind of collective reality. So I would love to hear, though, what are some synchronicities that particularly stick out to you in your life as being meaningful?
Well, you kind of hitting me from left field here. I haven't, I hardly even pay attention to them anymore because they happen.
I know what you mean.
But, how did I wind up not only in Dallas, Texas, but knowing the person who was one removed from the person that brought MDMA to Texas, and how did a geek, conservative, Republican, Catholic like me wind up dancing all night on MDMA at the Stark Club, in '84. So, I was just happened to be in the right place for me at the right time.
Yeah.
And I point out little synchronicities from time to time in the podcast simply because I've had so many people write and say they like hearing about them. But none of them are really big or earth-shaking, so much as just saying, oh, well, that's interesting. And how did that come to be? That this isn't really a synchronicity, I don't think that. But my ex-wife's name was Mary Alice. My current wife's given name was Mary, and her sister is Alice. They both had fathers who were electricians. Both of their fathers died while they were teenagers. And then it goes on and on. There's so many of them like that little things,
Yes, I do know.
One of the things that has happened to me that I find as an advantage, I didn't always, I've had to go through some down spots to get here too, that on my 40th birthday, I celebrated the fact that I was worth more than $1 million. And my 45th birthday, I was sleeping in my car under an overpass in Tampa, Florida. I had gone from the top of the mountain to the bottom. Yeah. And then I had to find a job as a temporary legal assistant to a lawyer who was 8 years old when I passed the bar in Texas. And that was a real ego-dissolving experience.
Yeah, that's better than psychedelics, I bet. Jeez.
Yeah, but the big thing that really happened to me, and it was all bad, but my father, my brother, and my mentor, all three died when they were 63 years old. Oh, wow. And when I turned 63 is when I started the Psychedelic Salon. Wow. And so now I feel I'm 11 years past my expiration date. So each day I try to make sure I have at least one special moment, something good that I look forward to each day. And it can be a little thing, maybe seeing the granddaughters, but whatever it is, I really learned how to live more intensely in the present. And, the future hasn't happened. The past is gone. All we have is here and now.
That's so
and so much time in the here and now we spend planning for the future. Like, what was it John Lennon that said that life is what happens when you're planning what you're going to do next?
Yeah, that's right. That's when you're making other plans. Exactly.
That's it. Yeah.
So I love this concept of the here and now. I think that's one of the things that psychedelics can offer us, as well as a practice like meditation or something else. It can put the focus back on the here and now. I mean, what would you describe the trajectory of you kind of learning that as a beneficial tool for experiencing life? I'm sure, like you said, after going past your expiration date, as you put it, that crystallizes, the importance of living for every moment. But not everyone latches onto that, depending on where they are in their lives, what their prerogatives are, what their priorities are. What was kind of your transition into that? Was that also aided by psychedelics?
Yeah, and I think a couple of I have had several really deep psychedelic experiences that those are the plus fives, that are ineffable. You can't bring anything back. The one thing that you do bring back, however, and this seems to be it's universal among all my friends, is that you come back from one of those experiences and you say, ultimately everything's fine. And there's just no way to describe it, but you come back with this sense, and after a few times reinforcing it, that ultimately everything is fine. The world is going to be what it is, and we're all going to do whatever we do in beyond this. Whether it's nothing, it doesn't matter. But everything is fine when you get into one of those deep states. And I don't know what it is, but it somehow becomes part of you that you no longer worry about the things that you were always worried about. Now, I still have worries. I still have down days.
Of course.
My PTSD will kick in every once in a while, and I'll become hard to live with. But, I have to, pull myself together and say, wait a minute, this is all going on in my head. Time to, reboot. And I haven't done psychedelics themselves. And last time I did ayahuasca was maybe 2 years ago now. I had high blood pressure, and so I decided to kind of ease off. And, but I smoke cannabis every day.
Me too.
So that kind of keeps me in the mindset where I just, I'm a stoner, I guess.
I know. So let's talk about.
I'm chill.
I'm very happy to hear that too, because I also smoke every day. I ingest marijuana. I'm a big, heavy user, and I use it for a variety of reasons. And I'm constantly reflecting on what those reasons are, partially because of some of the stigma that comes along with marijuana, just growing up in a culture where, the DEA still classifies it as a Schedule 1, no medical use whatsoever. Oh my God. But it's an interesting topic to me because I personally view it as a tool and an aid. And like any tool and any aid, any medicine, however you plant ally, whatever you want to call it, it is important to realize and reflect on the intention and the reasons that I'm consuming it, like anything, truthfully. So what's your experience like as a cannabis user every day? I like before a couple of years ago when I did a very low dose of psilocybin, I hadn't done psychedelics in 10 plus years. I felt like I had gotten most of what I needed from them. I got the message. I hung up the phone, so to speak. But I still do routinely use cannabis because I find it not only to be a leveling tool, something that helps balances, but it also gives me an open-mindedness that I think if I didn't maintain, I worry to think where I would be. Because I can be as judgy and closed-minded as anyone you can imagine, but I kind of actively foster this sense of not being like that because of my cannabis use. So can you talk a little bit about what's weed done for you?
Well, it's done so many different things. And what you just hit on is one of the things that seems to be missing in the discussion of medical marijuana, because people are afraid to say, hey, this helps my attitude. This makes me a better human being, which it does for me, for sure.
Yes.
It also, though, as you get older, you start paying more attention to some of the medical reports.
Yes.
And, cannabis is like this miracle substance that a friend of ours is a gerontologist, a doctor. He works with people in their 80s and 90s and up in Northern California. And this one nursing home that he started getting people to start using cannabis. I believe almost everybody there now is a daily user of cannabis. And I think they've almost all of them completely gone off their prescription meds.
Yeah. The
people running the place say this is a great place to be around. There's a lot more interaction. They're happy. Their appetites have come back. And by putting all these old people like me on all kinds of different prescription medicines with horrible side effects, we're really doing disservice to the people that cannabis alone, as an edible, or I vaporize. I've been vaporizing for a long time.
Yeah.
But cannabis has so many medicinal properties that we don't even know about yet. For me, I'll have my first toke when my back and leg pains start distracting me so much that I can't concentrate. But if you smoke every day like I do, and I smoke a fairly amount, I really can tell when I'm not stoned, but I really don't know when I am stoned anymore, because that's more of a natural state to me.
I know.
And I'm much more pleasant, for one thing. But it's also, like you say, it's some sort of a leveling substance for consciousness to where you don't hit all those spikes of peaks and valleys like you do in a normal life.
It's fascinating to me, and I was just having a conversation with someone where I was describing some people get very paranoid, especially with sativas, very paranoid. They don't like what's happening. And one of the other things I've noticed that it does, and this is something I find very valuable, is if you have something just below the conscious threshold of your experience there, when you smoke the right type, a nice sativa, something pretty potent, that's going to come to the top. And it serves as kind of a bridge or a mechanism that can pull thoughts that maybe you don't consciously want to investigate, including emotions in this. And it can allow you to actually do some pretty deep work and explore some aspects of yourself or what's going on around you in a way that can get to this leveling. So I know that a lot of people, when they think of smoking or taking cannabis in any way, they think of, oh, you're going to get sleepy and happy and hungry, and that's an indica for sure. But there's this whole other balancing mechanism that I'm still investigating. I mean, unfortunately, we don't have literature, medical literature on this stuff because it's still Schedule 1, but I'm sure in my lifetime it's going to come out. And the other fascinating thing to me, talking about it physiologically, is this endocannabinoid system that we have that's endogenous to us in our bodies, which is mind-blowing. I don't think people realize just how mind-blowing it is, that there is a system that seems to interact specifically with something out there in the world. It's quite fascinating. But yeah, I'm happy to hear you're a regular user, and I support that.
Yeah, I'm a regular heavy user. I judge my annual intake in pounds, not in grams.
As do I. And see, I'm in a place where, unfortunately, one of the things that I'm really looking forward to with legalization, especially when I can start growing it, is the financial cost of someone like me who's on the East Coast of maintaining a regular consumption of it. It's expensive when I review my finances at the end of the year. I know people in DC, which is, I regularly live in Silver Spring, Maryland, which is like right outside of Washington, DC, where it's legal.
I've been there.
Yeah, I grew up there. I live there now. We're about to move to the Hudson Valley. But right in DC, it's legal now, and people can grow marijuana. And to me, that's just such a revolutionary thing, because their costs are cut to zero. Their grow costs are what they're doing. And that, to me, is somewhere I aspire to be. And I think it's going to open up a lot of different creative outlets. And I know, as you know, a lot of people who consume weed regularly, irregularly, there is clearly some element of creativity and playfulness that emerges from it. And that, I think, collectively can help society and what's going on in the world as much as anything else. I know for me, from the day I started using it, my perception on the world changes. And another thing, I just to go a little deeper into the weed stuff, weed suppress. Another thing I'm very much interested in is dreams, and a theory that I've been exploring pretty rigorously, not just through the Western psychologists, but through Tibetan, different lenses, is this concept of as the world as a dream, as a collective dream, which is also found in many plant medicine traditions, many native populations around the world, Aboriginal, collective dream time. And marijuana also has this interesting property of suppressing dreams at night. Quite often, whenever I take a little bit of break, I get crazy dreams. And I'm thinking, like, this is a completely unfounded, hypothesis and speculation, but I think part of the reason dreams can be suppressed when consuming cannabis is that it does kind of make the world, you see a bit of the dreamlike qualities that emerge, of which I think synchronicities are a part of, things that don't really fit in to how we are taught or are supposed to look at the world regularly, quote unquote. And that's another thing I just think is fascinating about it. And I use and am aware of it when I do it. Because you're talking about, you don't notice when you're not high anymore. Of course, you're a regular heavy user like me. This is kind of our natural state, depending on what type of marijuana we're consuming. I know what that's like. And I think it gives a different bent and perspective on the world that, to me, at least in my life, sounds like in yours too, has been extremely beneficial. And it's not just something like ice cream to me where like, oh, I really like it, I just want to have a ton of ice cream. It's something that in a totally different category that really does provide tangible benefits. Yeah.
Well, you to live, you need food, water, and air. I go air, cannabis, water, and food.
love it.
Without the cannabis, you don't really care about that living too much. Getting into, I've got an interesting dream story that just happened.
Yes.
A week ago, our youngest granddaughter was here, and she and I were out in the other room, and we were just hanging around talking. And she told me, she said, "Oh, you were in my dream last night." And she went into some detail about this particular dream. Now, my wife didn't hear this, and she's my wife's granddaughter. I'm her step grandfather.
Right, gotcha.
And my wife never heard the story, but the very next morning, my wife gets up and says, "You won't believe this dream I had." And she tells me this dream, and it's a continuation of her granddaughter's dream that she hadn't even heard about. So that's just kind of a curious little synchronicity there.
It's an interesting thing. I mean, I think it points to a lot of different interesting ways of looking at the world and what it could be. Tibetans, they refer to as when we go to sleep and dream as the example dream. And they talk about our waking life as the actual dream. And they talk about the after death states as the dream at the end of time. And I think that's a really interesting way of looking and kind of dissecting our experiences in general. Lorenzo, we're getting to the end of this podcast. And I have 4 questions, 3 that come in a group that are rapid fire and 1 at the end, which we will get to. So I just want to say I've had an incredibly fun time speaking with you during this conversation. I would love to do it again.
I've enjoyed it myself. It's been great fun.
Cool. So here are the 3 questions. These are the somewhat rapid fire questions. And just, there's no pressure on these. What is your favorite color?
Oh, it would be Kelly Green.
Love it. What is your favorite number?
3.
Love it. And what is your favorite animal?
Dog.
Great. So my last question is, I ask every guest at the end of every episode, what is a practical tip that you could offer the listeners that has served you particularly well in your life?
Probably the best thing that served me is years ago, somebody, I was worried about something I'd done or whatever. And this guy says, you wouldn't worry so much about what people think about you if you actually knew how little anybody ever thinks about you.
So true.
And so I've applied this to myself, and I realized that, I don't think about all these other people very much either, and people aren't out there thinking about me all the time. They're thinking about their own issues, and so you got to kind of let go and forgive yourself for any things you've screwed up or people you've irritated or made mad or done wrong to, because they're probably not thinking about it anymore. It's only you that are thinking about it. And so it helps me to relax by realizing that I just have to worry about myself and not what they're thinking about me.
I love it. That is such great advice and couldn't be more true. And I'm sure if everyone listening examines that in their head, they'll see that it probably holds up too. Thank you so much for coming on. I would love to have another conversation. And one of the things we didn't get into that I want to continue, we'll continue via email, some other way, talking is, what's coming next for Psychedelic Salon, the Psychedelic Salon 2.0, as you put it. And I think there's going to be some really cool things to come out of that. And I'd love to help manifest any vision that collectively people are going to have for that. So truly, thank you so much for coming on. This has been awesome.
Sure. I'd love to come back anytime. Just let me know. I'll be happy to do it.
Cool. Thanks. yes. I hope you like that song. That song, it's an interesting song for me. I made it back, I think, in 2010, maybe 11. I hadn't been making music for a really long time, and the music I had been making before that was pretty poppy, pretty mainstream pop stuff. I was doing a lot of that in my latter end of my career in college, and this kind of was like a turning point where I kind of got into some more subtle electronic music stuff. So I'll never forget it. I always like it. I call it the stream just because I overlaid a stream, overdubbed a stream in the back of that one, if you caught it. I don't know why I spoke about the song this week. Usually don't do that. Interesting. Well, what a treat for you at the end, who listened past the music. Thanks, as always, guys, for tuning in. This is episode 45. We're coming up on episode 50, and 52 is going to mean I've done one of these a week for, holy crap, almost the whole year. And some of you have been there from the beginning. Some of you are just tuning in. And I really just want to say it's been a very important exercise and project in my life to do this podcast. Just the consistency of having to do it has been really helpful for me. Not to mention the many, many different and awesome people I've gotten to meet over the years. That's how long it feels for me. Over the months, over the year of doing this. It's really been awesome. So I really thank all of you who continue to listen for the first time. Awesome. Tell your friends if you like it. If you think there's someone out there who you think would benefit from this, listening to this, let them know. That's kind of the whole point with this. Also, really check out some of the other podcasts on MindPod Network. We got some really cool stuff coming out from there right now and coming up in the future. I think it's going to be a place that is pretty helpful for people and just cool and helpful. I like those two things. So that's it for this week. I'm not even going to tell you to rate and review the podcast on iTunes. That's it. I will see you next week.